Commander sat alone in the dark observation room, her 4 eyes fixed on the floating screens before her. The blue light from the displays painted shadows across her skin as she watched the footage play for the 3rd time that morning. She had served the Galactic Empire for 40 years. She had seen strange things across 100 worlds, but nothing had prepared her for what the drones were showing her now. On the screen, a human man walked through tall golden grass toward a forest. He carried no weapon. He wore no armor. He moved like someone taking a morning walk, not like someone entering the most dangerous territory on the planet. 7 was a death world. Everyone in the Empire knew this. The planet was beautiful with its purple skies and silver rivers, but it was home to creatures that had killed thousands of colonists from dozens of species. The worst of these creatures were had read the files on them many times. There were apex predators standing 2 meters tall on 4 powerful legs. They had fur as black as space, eyes that glowed like dying stars, and claws that could cut through military armor like paper. They hunted in packs. They feared nothing. In 300 years of galactic expansion, no species had ever found a way to live alongside them. Colonies that tried were found empty, with only bones and blood left behind. The humans had built a small farming settlement on 5 years ago. The Empire had placed surveillance drones around the colony, fully expecting to document another failure. Admiral had personally ordered to gather evidence that humans were too reckless and stupid to be trusted with further expansion rights. It was supposed to be simple: watch the humans die, file the report, move on. But the humans had not died. On the screen, the man reached the edge of the forest, leaned forward, her heart's beating faster. This was the part she could not understand, no matter how many times she watched it. From the shadows between the trees, 4 massive shapes emerged. Full-grown adults, each one capable of killing a dozen armed soldiers. Their black fur rippled as they moved. Their claws left deep marks in the earth. Their glowing eyes locked onto the human. And then they lowered their heads. The human smiled and walked forward without fear. He placed his hands on the largest's face, scratching behind its ears like it was a pet. The creature made a rumbling sound that the audio sensors picked up clearly. It was not a growl. It was something else, something softer. The other 3 circled around the human, pressing their massive bodies against him, nearly knocking him over. He laughed and spoke to them in a gentle voice. "Good morning, everyone. Did you sleep well? You look hungry. Did you not catch anything last night?" The largest, the one he called, made another rumbling sound and pushed her head against his chest. The human wrapped his arms around her neck in an embrace. Stop the footage. She stared at the frozen image of a human hugging a creature that had been classified as an extinction-level threat by the Empire's highest military council. "This is impossible," she whispered to the empty room. She had reported her initial findings to Admiral 2 weeks ago. He had laughed at her. He had called her equipment faulty and her judgment questionable. He had told her to check the drones for malfunctions and stop wasting his time with fantasy stories. But there were no malfunctions, had checked everything 5 times. The footage was real. The audio was real. The thermal sensors, the movement trackers, the biological scanners, everything confirmed what her eyes were telling her. A human had somehow formed a bond with predators. Not just tolerance, not just survival, a bond. The creatures treated him like pack, like family. Pulled up the human's file on another screen. He was 42 years old, born on Earth, trained as a veterinarian. He had come to 7 with his wife and their young daughter to start a new life as farmers. Nothing in his background explained what she was seeing. He was not a scientist. He was not a soldier. He was just a man who fixed sick animals and grew vegetables. She switched to another camera feed. This one showed the human colony itself, a collection of simple buildings surrounded by farmland. In the central yard, a little girl was playing. She looked about 7 years old with dark hair tied in 2 braids. She was running in circles, laughing loudly. Behind her, following like a shadow, was a breath caught in her throat. The predator moved slowly, carefully, its glowing eyes never leaving the child. But there was no hunger in those eyes, no threat. The creature was watching over her, protecting her. The little girl stumbled and fell. That was beside her instantly, lowering its huge head to nudge her gently. The child giggled and wrapped her small arms around the predator's neck. "That tickles." Watched the scene with a feeling she could not name. In her 40 years of service, she had seen many things. She had seen wars and disasters and the rise and fall of civilizations. She had seen species tear each other apart over resources and territory and pride, but she had never seen anything like this. She made her decision. She opened a communication channel to Admiral's office. "Admiral, this is Commander requesting an extended observation assignment on 7. There was a long pause before his voice came through, cold and annoyed. "I thought I told you to stop wasting time on that human colony." "Sir, with respect, I believe what I am observing could change everything we know about human capabilities. The footage I am collecting is unprecedented. I am requesting permission to continue monitoring and to compile a full report." Another pause. When spoke again, his voice carried a warning. "You have 3 months, Commander. 3 months to prove this is not a waste of Imperial resources. If you cannot provide evidence that matters, your career will suffer. Do you understand?" "I understand, Admiral." The channel closed, turned back to her screens, where the little human girl was now riding on this back, her tiny hands gripping the creature's black fur as it carried her across the yard. Somewhere in his chest, in the space between her two hearts, something shifted. She did not know what she was witnessing. She did not understand how it was possible, but she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that this footage would change the galaxy's understanding of humans forever. She just had to figure out how it all began. The answer came slowly, piece by piece, as dug through 3 years of archived drone footage that no one had bothered to watch carefully before. It started on a cold morning in the colony's 2nd year. The footage was grainy, captured by an old drone that had since been replaced. Watched as walked through the fields at dawn, checking his crops. He moved between rows of strange purple vegetables, touching leaves and pulling weeds. It was boring footage, nothing special. Then he stopped, his head turned toward the tree line. He stood very still for a long moment, listening to something the drone's microphones could not pick up. Then he started walking toward the forest. His wife appeared in the doorway of their home, holding their daughter who was still a baby then. "Where are you going?" "I heard something," he called back. "Something hurt, I need to check." "The forest is dangerous. You cannot just walk in there." But he was already moving, disappearing into the shadows between the trees. Watched him go with fear in her eyes, holding her baby close to her chest. Switched to a different drone, one that had been positioned deeper in the forest for wildlife monitoring. The footage showed pushing through thick bushes, following a sound that the drone could now pick up. A low, pained whimpering, an animal in distress. He found the mother in a small clearing. She was huge even by standards. Her black fur was matted with blood. A deep wound ran along her side, probably from a fight with another predator. She lay on the ground, breathing in short, desperate gasps. Around her, pressing close to her body, were 4 tiny cubs. Had studied biology. She knew that mothers were fiercely protective of their young. She knew that approaching a wounded was suicide. The creature should have attacked the moment she sensed him. Instead, the mother lifted her head and looked at him. Just looked. Her glowing eyes met his human eyes across the clearing. Knelt down slowly, keeping his movements calm and gentle. "Hey there," he said softly. "You're hurt pretty bad, aren't you? Those are your bobbies." The mother made a low sound, not a growl, something else. "I'm a doctor, for animals, I mean. I help creatures when they're sick or hurt. Will you let me help you?" He reached out his hand, palm up, and waited. The mother stared at him for a long time. Her cubs whimpered against her side. Blood continued to seep from her wound. Then slowly she lowered her head back to the ground. She did not attack. She did not flee. She simply waited. Moved closer. He examined her wound with careful hands. He spoke to her the whole time, his voice low and soothing, telling her what he was doing, promising her that he would try his best. "This is bad," he said finally. "I need to get supplies. I need you to stay here and stay alive. Can you do that for me? Can you stay alive for your bobbies?" He ran back to the colony. The footage showed him bursting through the door of his home, grabbing medical supplies, ignoring frightened questions. He ran back to the forest, back to the clearing, back to the wounded predator who should have killed him on sight. For 3 days treated the mother. He cleaned her wound. He gave her medicine. He brought her food and water. He slept beside her in the dirt, keeping watch over her cubs while she rested. Came to the edge of the forest each day, too scared to enter but too loyal to leave her husband alone. She brought him food and clean bandages and worried looks that he answered with tired smiles. "She's getting stronger," he told his wife on the second day. "I think she's going to make it." But she did not make it. On the fourth morning, watched wake up beside the mother and immediately know that something was wrong. The great creature's breathing had become shallow. Her eyes were dim. The wound had become infected despite his efforts, spreading poison through her body. She was dying. Sat beside her, stroking her fur, telling her she was brave, telling her she had fought so hard. The cubs, too young to understand, pressed against their mother's cold body and cried. "I'm sorry," whispered, tears running down his face. "I'm so sorry, I tried, I really tried." The mother used her last strength to lift her head. She looked at her cubs. Then she looked at. She pushed her nose against his chest, against his heart, and held it there for a long moment. Then she was gone. The cubs wailed. They were tiny things, barely the size of dogs, with soft black fur and eyes that had not yet learned to glow. They climbed over their mother's body, crying for her to wake up. They did not understand death. They only understood that they were alone and afraid. Gathered them in his arms, all 4 of them, squirming and crying and biting at him with teeth too small to cause real harm. He held them against his chest and let them feel his heartbeat. "It's okay," he told them. "It's okay, I've got you, I'm here." He carried them home. Stood in the doorway watching her husband approach with 4 predator cubs in his arms. Her face went through many emotions: fear, confusion, worry. But when she looked its face, at the tears still drying on his cheeks, at the desperate love already forming in his eyes, she simply stepped aside and let him in. "They'll need milk," she said quietly. "I'll warm some." That night, the footage showed the human family sitting together on the floor of their small home, held baby in one arm and a bottle for the cubs in the other, fed the remaining cubs one by one, patient and gentle despite his exhaustion. "What are we going to do with them?" asked. "Raise them. They're predators when they grow up. When they grow up, they'll remember that we loved them." He looked at his wife with steady eyes. "Their mother trusted me. She gave them to me with her last breath. I felt it. I felt her asking me to take care of them. I can't abandon them." Was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and touched one of the cubs, running her fingers through its soft fur. "We'll need more milk," she said finally, "and bigger bottles." Smiled, the first real smile since he had found the dying mother in the forest. "Thank you." In the observation room, 40 years of military experience told Commander that what she was watching was impossible. Every scientific study, every expert opinion, every piece of data in the Empire's vast archives said that could not bond with other species. They were hardwired for aggression. They could not be tamed. They could not be trained. They certainly could not be raised by humans. But the footage did not lie. She watched spend the next 3 years proving every expert wrong. She watched him bottle feed the cubs through their first months. She watched him teach them to hunt, stumbling through the forest alongside them, learning as they learned. She watched the cubs grow from tiny things into massive predators, and she watched them look at with the same love and trust that any child shows their father. She watched the impossible become real. And she finally understood what the mother had seen in those final moments. She had not seen a human. She had not seen a stranger or a threat or prey. She had seen someone who would love her children when she no longer could. She had seen a father. Commander's report spread through the empire like fire through dry grass. Within days of her initial findings reaching the high command, requests for access to the footage came pouring in. Military leaders wanted to see it. Scientists demanded copies. Politicians argued about whether it should be classified or released to the public. The quiet observation mission on a forgotten frontier world had become the most talked-about discovery in the sector. Admiral arrived on the observation station personally, his silver uniform pressed sharp and his expression harder than stone. He watched the footage in silence, his 3 arms folded across his chest. When it ended, he watched it again. And again. "This is real," he finally said. It was not a question. "Yes, Admiral, I have every piece of data myself. They have destroyed 14 colonies in my lifetime alone. They killed my brother on 3. His voice was flat, empty of emotion, but could see something moving behind his eyes. "And you are telling me that a human farmer has turned them into pets?" "Not pets, Admiral, family. The distinction appears to be important." Made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something darker. He turned away from the screens. "The Council has requested a diplomatic mission to the colony. They want to understand how this happened. They want to know if it can be replicated." He paused. "They are sending." Knew the name. Everyone in the Empire knew the name. Was one of the oldest and most respected species in the galaxy. They had been studying life across the stars for millions of years. They believed they understood everything about how creatures thought, felt, and behaved. Himself had written the definitive study on psychology, the very study that concluded peaceful coexistence with them was impossible. "He will not believe it," said quietly. "Then he will learn to believe it. The Council has made their decision." 2 weeks later, ship landed on 7. He was tall even for with pale blue skin and eyes that seemed to look through everything they saw. He moved with the careful grace of someone who had spent centuries perfecting every gesture. When he stepped off his ship and saw the human colony for the first time, his expression showed nothing but polite interest. Met him at the edge of the settlement. He wore simple farming clothes, dirt on his knees and sweat on his brow from a morning of work. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows of a nearby building, one of the watched with glowing eyes. "Welcome to our home," said with a warm smile. "You must be would you like some water, tea? It's hot today." Studied the human with the same attention he might give to an interesting insect. "I would like to understand," he said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority, "how you accomplished what every scientific principle says is impossible." Smile grew a little wider. "You want to know about my kids? Come inside, I'll introduce you." He led into the main house where was preparing lunch. She nodded politely to but kept her attention on her cooking. At the table, Young was drawing pictures with colored pencils. She looked up as they entered. "Daddy, is this the alien who wants to meet?" "That's right, sweetheart. Can you show your drawings while I get your brothers and sisters?" Walked to the back door and opened it. He made a soft whistling sound. The ground shook, felt it through his feet, a rhythmic pounding that grew closer. His ancient instincts, buried deep beneath centuries of civilization, screamed at him to run. 4 entered the house. They had to duck to fit through the door. Each one was massive, powerful, covered in black fur that seemed to absorb the light. Their claws clicked on the wooden floor. Their glowing eyes swept the room, nodding the stranger, assessing the threat. Then they saw, and everything changed. The largest one, the female called, made a sound like rolling thunder and pushed her head against his chest. He laughed and scratched behind her ears. The other three circled around him, pressing close, demanding attention. One of them noticed and immediately padded over to lie beside her chair, resting its massive head on her small lap. "These are my children," said simply, "and they're named after flowers from Earth. Well, except he's named after a river. He was always the one who loved water." Stood frozen. In his 3,000 years of life, he had never seen anything like this. Every instinct, every piece of knowledge, every certainty he had built his understanding on was crumbling before his eyes. "How?" The word came out barely louder than a whisper. Guided him to a chair. Watched with careful eyes but made no aggressive move. Placed cups of tea on the table, moving between the massive predators as comfortably as if they were furniture. "I found them when they were bobbies," explained. "Their mother was dying, she needed help, so I helped her. When she died, the cubs needed someone, so I was someone." That is not an explanation. That is not a method. His voice shook with something that might have been frustration or might have been fear. They are biologically incapable of forming bonds with other species. Their brain structure prevents it. Their hormones prevent it. Their evolution prevents it. Maybe their hearts don't care about that. Stared at him. Hearts do not override biology. "No, then explain them." Gestured at the four who had settled around the room like a protective wall, was still pressed against his side, was gently sniffing his robes with curiosity, had joined beside, and the little girl was braiding flowers into her black fur. "I cannot explain them," admitted. "I have spent my entire career understanding predator species. I have published works that are considered definitive across the empire, and I cannot explain what I am seeing in this room." Sat down across from her expression calm and kind. "Maybe that's because you're looking for the wrong things," she said. "You want to understand how to tame them, but he didn't tame them. He loved them. There's no method to love, no science, no replicable process. You just do it even when it doesn't make sense, especially when it doesn't make sense. That is," search for words, "that is not rational." "No," agreed, "it's human." They stayed on 7 for 1 month. He observed everything. He took notes. He ran tests and scans and analyses. He interviewed an even little who told him very seriously that was the best big sister in the whole galaxy. He watched hunt alongside teaching them and learning from them in equal measure. He watched cook dinner while 3 apex predators lay at her feet, waiting patiently for scraps. He watched fall asleep curled against warm body, and he watched the predator stay perfectly still for hours so as not to wake her. At the end of the month, he returned to his ship and wrote his report. It was short. It was honest. It contained words that I had never written before. The humans did not tame they adopted them. The distinction is not merely semantic. Taming implies dominance, control, the breaking of a wild spirit. What the humans have done is something else entirely. They have expanded the boundaries of family to include creatures that should have been their enemies. I have studied life for 3,000 years. I believed I understood the limits of what was possible between species. I was wrong. The humans have something we do not. They call it heart. I do not fully understand what this means. I do not believe it can be taught or replicated, but I have seen its power with my own eyes. It makes impossible things real. When the report reached the Empire's High Council, it sparked debates that would last for years. Some called a fool who had been tricked by human lies. Others demanded that the footage be studied, analyzed, and used to develop new strategies for dealing with hostile species across the galaxy. But on 7, life continued as it always had, tended his crops, cooked her meals, grew a little taller each day, and 4, each one capable of destroying an army, lived peacefully among them. Because they were family. And family, the humans knew, was stronger than any force in the universe. The message came on a quiet morning, 6 months after his visit. Commander was reviewing routine footage when a priority alert flashed across her screen. Medical emergency at the human colony. She pulled up the live feed and felt her heart stop. Was lying on a bed inside his home, sat beside him, holding his hand. Their faces were pale and drawn with a kind of fear that recognized. She had seen that look before, on the faces of soldiers who knew they would not survive. She accessed the colony's medical records, using clearance she probably should not have had. What she found made her sink back in her chair. Was dying. The diagnosis was a rare condition that attacked human cellular structure from the inside. There was no cure in human medicine. The disease was too specialized, too complex, too cruel. Once it began, nothing could stop it. Had perhaps 2 months left, perhaps less. Immediately sent a message to Admiral, requesting that the Empire offer its advanced medical technology. The Galactic Empire had cured diseases that other species could not even name. Surely they could help one human farmer. The response came 3 days later. Empire medical technology was incompatible with human biology. The treatments that worked on other species would only cause more harm. There was nothing they could do. Sat alone in the darkness of her observation room and cried. She had never met personally. She had only watched him through screens, through the cold eyes of drones. But over the months of observation, she had come to care about him in a way she could not fully explain. He was kind. He was gentle. He loved without limit or reason. The galaxy needed more people like him, not fewer. And now he was going to die. On the screens, life continued at the colony, but everything had changed. Moved slower now, his strength fading day by day. He still went to the fields each morning, still fed his crops, still cared for his animals. But he tired quickly. He rested often. The light in his eyes, that warm light that had charmed a dying mother and turned 4 predators into family, was growing dim. The knew something was wrong. Watched them with growing wonder as the weeks passed. The 4 predators who had roamed freely across the territory for years stopped leaving the colony. They stayed close to at all times, watching him with worried eyes, following his every movement. The largest and most independent of them refused to leave his side even to hunt. She lay beside his bed through the long nights, her massive body pressed against the wall of the house, her head turned toward the window where she could see him sleeping. When he woke, she was waiting. When he walked outside, she walked beside him, letting him lean on her when his legs grew weak. One evening, watched sit on the porch of his home with his head resting on his lap. Was inside, putting to bed. The purple sky of 7 was fading to black, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "I'm sorry," said softly, running his fingers through her dark fur. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." They made a low sound, pressing closer to him. "I need you to be strong, okay? When I'm gone and we'll need you, they'll need all of you. Can you do that for me? Can you take care of them?" Lifted her head and looked at him. Her glowing eyes, which had once terrified entire colonies, were soft with something that looked remarkably like sorrow. She pushed her forehead against his chest, against his heart, and held it there. "Good girl," whispered. "That's my good girl." The final day came too quickly. Had not slept in 30 hours, unable to look away from her screens. She watched as woke that morning, weaker than he had ever been. She watched help him dress, her hands steady even as tears ran down her face. She watched Little, now 8 years old, hold her father's hand and tell him she loved him, over and over, as if saying it enough times might make him stay. Asked to go outside. He wanted to see the meadow one last time. The meadow where it all began, where he had found a dying mother and 4 orphaned cubs, where his impossible family had been born. Helped him walk, held his other hand, and behind them, moving slowly to match their pace, came the 4. The meadow was beautiful in the morning light. Golden grass swayed in a gentle breeze. Purple flowers dotted the ground like scattered gems. In the distance, The forest where the mother had died stood silent and patient. Sat down in the soft grass. Sat beside him, wrapping her arms around him. Curled into his lap, small and precious and trying so hard to be brave. The four formed a circle around them. What happened next was recorded by 7 different drones from 7 different angles. The footage would later be watched by billions across the galaxy. It would be studied by scientists, debated by philosophers, and remembered by children of 100 different species for generations to come. One by one they approached. First came the youngest, the one who loved water and was always the most playful. He lowered his massive head to his chest and made a sound that no imperial scientist had ever recorded from before. It was not a growl or a roar. It was a keen, low and mournful, like a song of loss. He pressed his forehead to his heart and held it there, trembling. "Hey, buddy," said weakly, lifting one hand to touch his face. "It's okay. Don't be sad. You're going to be okay." Next came the quietest of the 4, the one who always brought flowers crushed in her gentle jaws. She made the same sound, that heartbreaking keen, and pressed close to. Her eyes were closed as if she could not bear to look. Followed the most curious, the one who had once tried to eat robes. He did not make a sound. He simply lay down beside, pressing his warm body against the human side, giving him warmth he no longer had. And finally came the largest of them, the one who had been barely bigger than a cat when first held her, the one who had grown into a creature capable of leveling cities, but who had never used her strength for anything but protecting the family that loved her. She stood before for a long moment, her glowing eyes locked on his fatting ones. Something passed between them, a communication deeper than words, deeper than species, deeper than the laws of biology that said this bond was impossible. Then she lowered her head. She pressed her forehead to his, the way she had done 1,000 times before, the way she had done the very first time he held her as a crying cub, the way she would never be able to do again. From her throat came the keen, louder and more terrible than the others. It echoed across the meadow, across the fields, across the forest where her mother was buried. It was the sound of a heart breaking. Lifted his trembling hands and placed them on either side of her face. "I love you," he told her. "I love all of you so much. You made my life so beautiful. You were never monsters. You were never beasts. You were my children, my family, and I am so proud of who you became." His voice was fatting. His breath was shallow, was crying silently against his shoulder, was gripping his shirt so tight her knuckles were white. "Take care of them," whispered Tu, using the last of his strength. "Take care of my girls, promise me." Closed her eyes. The keen changed, becoming softer, becoming something that sounded almost like words. "A promise." Smiled, that same warm smile that had once convinced a dying mother to trust him with her children. "Good girl," he said, "that's my good girl." He closed his eyes. And with his family around him, human and together, let go. The 4 lifted their heads to the sky and sang. It was not a roar. It was not a howl. It was something that had no name in any language the Empire had ever recorded. A sound of mourning, a sound of love, a sound that carried across the planet, reaching drones and sensors and the ears of creatures miles away. In her observation room, Commander wept without shame. Admiral, watching from his command ship, stood in silence with his head bowed. Receiving the live feed in his chambers across the galaxy, pressed his ancient hand to his heart and whispered words of blessing in a language that had been old when humans were still learning to walk. And in a meadow on a frontier world, surrounded by impossible love, passed peacefully from the universe that had been made better by his presence. The golden grass swayed in the breeze. The purple flowers nodded their heads. And 4 apex predators curled around the body of their father and refused to let him go. The footage was released to the public 6 months after his death, at his personal request. She had been approached by imperial officials who wanted to keep the recordings classified. They argued that the footage was too valuable, too important for military and scientific research. They offered her money, protection, anything she wanted in exchange for her silence. Refused. "My husband spent his whole life showing that love was stronger than fear," she told the officials, standing straight and proud despite the grief that still marked her face. "He would want the galaxy to see. He would want everyone to understand." So the footage was released. It spread across every network, every planet, every species in the known galaxy. Billions of beings watched the impossible story unfold. They watched a human man save 4 orphaned cubs. They watched him raise them with nothing but kindness and patience. They watched him transform extinction-level predators into loyal, loving family. And they watched him die surrounded by that family, with 4 massive creatures singing him goodbye. The reactions were mixed, as they always are when something challenges what people believe to be true. Some refused to accept it. They called the footage fake, manipulated, a trick by humans to improve their standing in the empire. There were monsters, they insisted. They had killed thousands. No amount of pretty images could change what they really were. Others were moved beyond words. Young beings across 100 worlds watched the footage with tears in their eyes. They saw in something that their own cultures had forgotten or never known, a willingness to reach out, a refusal to see enemies where family might grow instead. And some, a small but growing number, began to ask dangerous questions. If humans could do this with, what else might be possible? How many species had the Empire written off as hostile, unreachable, beyond saving? How many wars had been fought against enemies who might have been friends if someone had only tried to understand them? The questions spread like seeds on the wind, taking root in unexpected places. On 7, life continued. Took over the farm. She worked hard, harder than she had ever worked before, but she was not alone. The 4 stayed. They helped in their own ways, carrying heavy loads, guarding the fields from pests, watching over as she grew. Was always beside them. The great predator had changed after death. She was quieter, slower, as if some essential fire had gone out inside her, but her devotion to the family remained absolute. Where went, followed. Where played, watched. Years passed, grew from a little girl into a young woman. She had her father's warm smile and her mother's quiet strength. She had also inherited something that could not be measured or named, a gift for connecting with creatures that others feared. Wild began appearing near the colony. Young ones, curious ones, drawn by something they could not explain. Instead of attacking, they approached carefully, watching the strange scene of humans and predators living together. Some came once and left. Others stayed, slowly accepting the colony as territory, the humans as pack. Taught them, she had learned everything from watching her father, and now she passed that knowledge on. How to approach without threatening. How to speak with tone and touch instead of words. How to see a frightened animal instead of a dangerous beast. Word spread through the empire. The colony on 7 was growing. The population around it was growing too, but there were no attacks, no deaths, no fear. 10 years after death, a young scientist named Nara arrived to study the phenomenon. She was different from, more open, more willing to accept what she could not explain. She had grown up watching the footage of goodbye. It had shaped her, changed her understanding of what was possible between species. Now she wanted to see the legacy for herself. Met her at the edge of the settlement just as her father had once met. But where there had been one watching from the shadows back then, now there were dozens. They lounged in the sun, played in the fields, moved among the humans with easy familiarity. "Welcome to 7, said with a smile. "You must be the, would you like some tea?" Nara stared at the scene around her with wide eyes. "How many of them are there now?" About 40 in the main territory, more in the surrounding areas. They come and go. gestured to a massive shape resting in the shade of a nearby building. She was one of the original four. She's getting old now, but she still runs this place. As if hearing her name, lifted her muzzled head and looked at them. Her eyes, still glowing but dimmer with age, found face and softened. "She looks at you like my grandmother used to look at me," Nara said quietly. "She helped raise me. She was there when I took my first steps. She was there when I had nightmares. She was there when my father died." His voice was steady, but old pain moved beneath the surface. "She's family." They walked through the colony together. Nara saw human children playing with cubs. She saw farmers working alongside adult predators. She saw a world that every scientific text said could not exist. "Your father's method," Nara finally said. "The Empire still doesn't understand it. We've tried to replicate it with other species on other worlds. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. We don't know why." Smiled, scratching behind the ears. The old leaned into her touch with a contented rumble. "It's not complicated," she said. "Dad used to say that every creature in the universe just wants to be seen, to matter to someone. He looked at 4 orphaned predators, and instead of seeing monsters, he saw children who needed a parent. That's all it was. He just saw them." "That cannot be the entire explanation." "Why not?" "Because it's too simple. There must be more to it, some technique, some special knowledge." Turned to face and Nara was struck by how much she looked like the man in the old footage. The same warm eyes, the same patient kindness. "The Empire keeps trying to turn love into a formula," said gently. "You want steps you can follow, methods you can teach, but that's not how it works. You can't schedule compassion. You can't plan empathy. You just have to choose every day to see the scared child inside the scary monster, and then you have to act on what you see." She looked up at the Empire officer's recording drone, knowing her words would be broadcast to countless worlds. "That's what humans do. We look at the universe, and where everyone else sees danger, we see family waiting to happen. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we get hurt. Sometimes we fail. But we keep trying because we believe that connection is worth the risk." She paused, and her voice grew softer. "My father proved it was possible. Now it's up to the rest of us to prove it was not a miracle. It was a choice, one anyone can make." Nara stayed on 7 for 3 months. She filled countless reports with observations, data, and analysis. But her most important work was her final recommendation to the Empire's High Council. Species Classification Update: Humanity. Previous status: Unremarkable minor expansion species. Updated status: Apex bonding predators. Threat assessment: Unknown. Humans possess an ability that our science cannot measure and our models cannot predict. They form bonds across biological and psychological barriers that should be impassable. They adopt creatures that should be enemies. They create family where logic says only conflict should exist. We have seen them tame untamable predators with nothing but kindness. We have seen their children grow up alongside creatures that could kill them with a single blow. We have seen 4 apex predators mourn a human's death like they had lost their own father. Recommendation: Do not engage humanity as enemies. They have a concerning tendency to make you love them instead. Further recommendation: Perhaps we should ask them to teach us. The report sparked new debates, new studies, new attempts to understand. Some succeeded, others failed. But slowly across the galaxy, things began to change. On a dozen worlds, young beings from a dozen species began approaching creatures they had been taught to fear. Not all of them survived, but many did. And where they succeeded, new communities formed, new bonds were created, new families were born. It would take generations to see the full impact of what had started, but the seeds were planted. The impossible had been proven possible, and in the quiet meadows of 7, where a human man had once held 4 crying cubs and promised to love them, that love continued to grow. lived for 5 more years after Nara's visit. She died peacefully one autumn morning, surrounded by her pack, with her head resting in its lap. Buried her in the meadow, beside the grave of, and the older grave of the mother who had started it all. 3 generations of love, resting together in the golden grass. Above the graves, placed a simple marker with words that would be read by visitors for centuries to come. Here lies a family that was never supposed to exist. They loved each other anyway. The wind moved through the meadow, carrying the scent of purple flowers. And somewhere in the forest, a sang.